welcome to the sleep route. If you are ready to fall asleep, please fasten your seatbelts and let's start our story. The morning mist in a medieval village often clung to the thatch roofs and the rough-hewn timbers of the houses, cool, damp veil that promised little warmth as the sun slowly, hesitantly began its climb. Personal hygiene, if one could call it that in our modern sense, was a pragmatic affair. Dictated by necessity, they needed bread, tilled the soil, mended garments, and prepared meager meals. The sweet, earthy smell of compost mingled with the sharp temps of animal waste from the nearby pens. A shepherd, after a long day tending his flock in muddy fields, might seek to wash the worst of the grime from his limbs, not in a large tub. Homes were often small, with entire families sharing a single room, or at best, two. The idea of a private space for bathing, a dedicated room with plumbing and hot water, was utterly beyond the realm of imagination. If a bath was taken, it was often in the main living space, perhaps by the hearth for warmth, with little thought given to the modesty that we now associate with such an act. Wells could run dry, rivers could become polluted, and fetching water was often a laborious task requiring significant effort. These were not the pristine private havens we associate with modern spas. Instead, they were often communal spaces, perhaps a large wooden tub or a shared pool, where many individuals would cleanse together. The water, though heated, would quickly become murky, and the atmosphere would be bustling and noisy. The focus was on shared communal cleansing, a social event as much as a hygienic one. Rather than a private moment of relaxation and self-renewal, the very air would be heavy with steam and the scent of many bodies, a unique combination of human warmth and dampness. The sounds of conversation, the splashing, the general commotion would permeate these spaces, a communal rather than solitary experience. To use precious water for extensive bathing when it was needed for drinking, cooking and watering livestock would have seemed an indulgence, even a waste. Every drop was valued, every bucket carried with care. This practical constraint, far more than any abstract belief, played a significant role in limiting the frequency and thoroughness of personal washing. The priority was survival, sustenance, and the efficient allocation of limited resources, and bathing simply did not rank high on that list of priorities for the majority of the population. The weight of a full water bucket, carried over an even ground, was a tangible lesson in the value of every single drop. The human body, in its natural state, was less veiled, less hidden from the common gaze within the intimate confines of the home. This lack of private space further contributed to the rarity of full-body washing, as the logistics of heating enough water and finding a secluded spot were significant hurdles. The body was seen as a vessel for labor, for procreation, for spiritual devotion, but not necessarily as something to be constantly scrubbed and purified in the way we envision today. It was a more direct, less mediated relationship with one's physical self and the natural world, a world where the elements, earth, air, water, fire, exerted a more palpable influence on daily existence, and so the morning mist would dissipate, giving way to the tasks of the day. And the cycle of medieval life, with its unique understanding of cleanliness, would continue, slow and unhurried. The enduring presence of the earth, the sky, and the seasons shaped their daily practices, including their cautious approach to water, a precious and often feared commodity. The shared space meant shared presence, a constant awareness of others, which made extensive personal washing a cumbersome and often avoided task. But perhaps by wading into a shallow stream or using a bucket of water from the well, soap, if available at all, was often a harsh, lye-based substance, more akin to laundry soap than the gentle formulations we use on our skin today. They would have learned from a young age to accept the realities of their unwashed world. Play often took place outdoors, in the mud, among animals, and in dusty fields. Their clothing, often simple and unadorned, would quickly show the marks of their energetic lives. Yet this was not seen as a failing, but simply as the natural state of childhood. The concept of daily changing of clothes or frequent washing of garments was also a luxury, and clothes were mended, patched, and worn until they literally fell apart, carrying with them the accumulated scents and traces of daily life. The small hands and faces, often smudged with dirt, were simply part of their innocence, a reflection of their active outdoor existence. It was not widely manufactured or easily accessible to the common person. For many, a simple coarse cloth or a handful of straw might be used for scrubbing combined with plain water. The friction, rather than the cleansing properties of soap, would be relied upon to dislodge visible dirt. The skin, therefore, was often rougher, less smooth, and more accustomed to the elements, developing a natural resilience against the constant exposure to dust, sun, and cold. The feel of rough fabric against the skin, designed to scrape away rather than dissolve grime, would be a familiar sensation. The water, often cold, would be scooped and poured. A quick ablution that focused on visible dirt rather than a comprehensive cleansing of the entire body. The experience was utilitarian, a means to an end, rather than a leisurely ritual of self-care. The chill of the water, the brisk rub with a coarse cloth, these were sensations of necessity, not indulgence. The pervasive scent of wood smoke, ever present, would cling to clothes and hair, a comforting reminder of the hearth and home. Beneath these, subtle human odors, largely unmasked by perfumes or frequent washing, contributed to the unique olfactory signature of a community. These were not considered offensive in the way they might be today. Rather, they were simply part of the natural order, an inevitable consequence of human proximity and the lack of readily available alternatives for deep cleansing. To our modern sensibilities, the air might seem heavy, but to the medieval inhabitant, it was simply the air, the familiar breath of their world. The very air had a weight to it, a blend of life and living that was both immediate and constant. Yet the washing of hands was not a constant ritual, save perhaps before a communal meal or a religious observance. The lingering dirt, the grime of labor, became an almost invisible part of one's existence, a natural consequence of living so intimately with the earth and its demands. The sense of touch, then, was different. The skin, accustomed to a constant film of dust and sweat, experienced the world through a less sensitive, perhaps more resilient, barrier. The texture of wool against unwashed skin, the feel of rough linen, the cool dampness of a stone wall, these sensations were woven into the very fabric of daily existence, a constant reminder of the intimate connection between body and environment. The subtle coarseness of the skin, toughened by exposure and lack of frequent softening, would be a familiar sensation, a constant companion, prevailing beliefs, rather than by any deep understanding of cleanliness or sanitation. The first act of the day for many might involve little more than a quick rub of the hands and face with a damp cloth, or perhaps a basin of water brought in from the well. This water, often cold and still, was not for immersing the body, but for a superficial cleansing, a gesture more symbolic than truly purifying. The concept of clean was not tied to the absence of visible dirt alone, but to a deeper, almost spiritual understanding of purity that often conflicted with the physical act of bathing. The sensation of the cold water on the skin would be immediate. A brisk wake-up, but one not followed by the expansive feeling of a full immersion. Inside, the sounds were muted, the rustle of straw mattresses as bodies shifted, the low murmur of voices, and the creak of wooden shutters being unlatched. Imagine yourself waking in such a place, the air thick with the faint scent of wood smoke from the hearth, mingled with the earthy aroma of damp soil and the subtle, lingering presence of unwashed humanity. There was no rush to embrace the day with a refreshing splash. Indeed, the very notion of a morning bath, as we might conceive of it, would have been utterly foreign, even perplexing. The chill in the air, the condensation on the inside of the windows, if windows there were, would serve as a constant, gentle reminder of the world outside, a world that demanded resilience and a pragmatic approach to daily living. Life unfolded with a deliberate slowness, each day mirroring the last in its fundamental rhythms. Consider the hands, those indispensable tools of daily life. The scent of a medieval village, therefore, was a complex tapestry of odors. Bathing, when it did occur, was often a sporadic and practical affair, driven more by necessity after particularly arduous or dirty tasks than by a desire for routine freshness. The very concept of privacy, too, was vastly different. Even the materials available for personal care were rudimentary. Consider the children of the medieval era, growing up in this environment. The scarcity of clean water itself was a constant challenge. Even during the rare moments of a more extensive wash, perhaps in a public bathhouse in larger towns, the experience was markedly different. The rhythm of their lives, therefore, was deeply intertwined with this different relationship to water and cleanliness. As we drift onward from the intimate details of daily medieval life, let us now turn our attention to a fading, echo a grand tradition that once permeated the Roman world and whose slow decline illuminates much about the changing attitudes towards bathing in the European Middle Ages. Imagine, if you will, the bustling, vibrant life of a Roman city 1,000 years before our medieval setting. The sounds would have been a constant symphony of human interaction, a vibrant testament to the importance of these spaces. The sense of touch would have been central to the experience. The smooth, cool marble beneath bare feet invasions. Internal conflicts and the fragmentation of central authority meant that infrastructure, including the aqueducts that supplied the baths with fresh water, fell into disrepair or were actively damaged. While early Christianity did not explicitly forbid bathing, a growing emphasis on spiritual purity often overshadowed physical cleanliness. The monastic ideal, which celebrated asceticism and self-denial, viewed excessive attention to the body as a worldly indulgence, a distraction from the pursuit of salvation. The flesh was often seen as a source of temptation, and rigorous hygiene was not always prioritized. The communal aspect of Roman bathing, while not perfectly sterile, did provide a means for a large segment of the population to regularly cleanse themselves and to access heated water. Its absence contributed to a general decline in physical cleanliness, particularly in urban areas, which would then be exacerbated by factors like poor waste disposal and crowded living conditions. The prevailing belief was that disease was caused by imbalances in humors or by bad air, rather than by microscopic pathogens. Thus, the idea that bathing could prevent illness was not a widespread or scientifically supported concept. The consequences of this decline in public hygiene were largely unseen and misunderstood, impacting the collective health in ways no one at the time could truly grasp. While there were exceptions and variations in practice, a general trend emerged where the public communal bathing that had been so central to Roman life began to be viewed with suspicion. Some monastic orders might maintain rudimentary washing facilities, or private individuals of great wealth might construct small private baths, but these were isolated exceptions rather than widespread practices. The concept of public, accessible, communal bathing as a social cornerstone had effectively vanished from much of Europe. The vast empty shells of the Roman baths stood as stark reminders of a different era, a different understanding of the body, and a different relationship to water. A relationship that had been largely abandoned in the medieval world, setting the stage for a new and often more fearful perception of the very act of washing. The grand columns, the shattered archways, and the crumbling mosaics whispered tales of a time when water was not feared, but embraced a stark contrast to the emerging medieval worldview, where the bath was seen as something to be approached with caution and trepidation. A shadow of a once great practice. The nakedness, the mixed company, and the potential for moral laxity within the baths were increasingly frowned upon by ecclesiastical authorities. The very concept of open communal washing, so normal for Romans, became seen as a potential breeding ground for sin, rather than a healthy social practice. Without a reliable and abundant water supply, the very foundation of the baths crumbled. As the empire contracted and urban centers declined, these massive buildings, too expensive to maintain, were often repurposed. Some were plundered for their valuable building materials, the marble, the lead pipes, the bronze fixtures, to be used in new constructions, or simply sold off. Others were converted into churches, workshops, or even private dwellings, their grand halls subdivided and their pools filled in. Imagine walking through a once vibrant caldarium, now serving as a stable. Its intricate mosaic floor covered in straw, its walls blackened by smoke from cooking fires. The echoes of laughter and conversation replaced by the lowing of cattle and the clatter of tools. The grand spaces, once filled with human warmth and activity, would gradually become silent, their purpose lost to the dust of time and changing needs. Imagine the once flowing channels, now choked with debris, the once gleaming pools dry and cracked, silent witnesses to a bygone era. The knowledge of how to construct and maintain such complex hydraulic systems was largely lost or became unnecessary in a more fragmented, localized world. The very memory of what these places once represented began to fade for many, replaced by local folklore or simple indifference. The sophisticated engineering, the luxurious amenities, the social centrality, all became distant memories, perhaps whispered about in hushed tones as tales of a glorious but vanished past. The wind would whistle through broken arches, and weeds would grow in cracks where once elaborate fountains flowed, a quiet testament to a profound societal shift. The intricate systems that had brought water from distant springs and rivers, a triumph of Roman engineering, slowly ceased to function, leaving the magnificent structures as empty shells. The The silence that would eventually settle over these once bustling places would be profound, a stark contrast to their former vibrant existence. The invigorating warmth of the caldarium, the bracing chill of the frigidarium, and the silky feel of oil on freshly cleansed skin. This was a sensory world of comfort, luxury, and social connection, where the body was celebrated, cared for, and openly displayed. The Romans understood intuitively the link between physical cleanliness and overall well-being, though their understanding of hygiene was empirical rather than scientific. They valued the feeling of being refreshed, the ease of social interaction, and the therapeutic benefits of hot water and massage. The pervasive warmth, the comforting dampness, and the subtle scent of oils would have created an enveloping atmosphere of relaxation and well-being. The air would have been filled with the chatter of voices, the clatter of sandals on stone, and the rich, complex aromas emanating from markets and kitchens. The reasons were complex and multifaceted, a slow unraveling rather than a sudden collapse. Economic hardship played a significant role. Maintaining these vast structures with their elaborate heating systems, the hypocaust system, requiring constant fuel, and labor, their numerous staff, and their intricate water supplies, was incredibly expensive. As imperial coffers dwindled and local economies faced increasing strain, the resources simply became unavailable to sustain such luxuries on a widespread scale. The grandeur became unsustainable, and the maintenance became a burden rather than a source of civic pride. The once efficient network of administrators and laborers, crucial for the upkeep of such vast complexes, slowly dissolved, leaving the infrastructure vulnerable to neglect. At the heart of many of these cities, rising majestically, stood the Roman baths, not merely places for cleansing, but grand social complexes, architectural marvels, and indispensable hubs of community life. The sheer scale of these structures, their elaborate design, and their pervasive presence in Roman society speak volumes about a civilization that embraced water and communal cleansing with an enthusiasm far removed from the medieval mindset we are exploring. These Roman baths or thermae were far more than simple wash houses. They were sprawling edifices of marble and mosaic, adorned with intricate frescoes and statues, designed to impress and to serve a multitude of functions. Within their expansive walls, one could find not only various bathing rooms, the frigidarium, the tepidarium, and the caldarium, but also gymnasiums for exercise, libraries for study lecture, halls for intellectual discourse, shops for commerce, and even gardens for leisurely strolls. The routine of bathing was an elaborate ritual beginning with physical activity, followed by a progression through rooms of varying temperatures, often ending with a final plunge into cold water and perhaps an anointing with oils by a skilled attendant. This was a daily indulgence, a communal experience, and a cornerstone of Roman identity, accessible to nearly all citizens, regardless of social standing, though often with separate facilities or times for men and women. The sounds of splashing water, the murmur of conversations, and the distant shouts from the exercise grounds would have created a lively, immersive soundscape within these magnificent structures. The very air in a Roman bath would have been thick with steam, the murmur of conversation, and the splash of water. However, as the Roman Empire began its long, gradual decline, so too did the grandeur and accessibility of these public baths. Political instability further exacerbated the situation. Culturally, the rise of Christianity also contributed to a shifting perception of the body and its care. The very architecture of the baths, once so impressive, began to undergo a transformation. By the early medieval period, the great Roman baths of Europe were largely derelict ruins. Their intricate heating systems, long, cold, and defunct, their aqueducts crumbling. The disappearance of public baths also meant a significant loss of public health infrastructure, though this was not understood in terms of germ theory at the time. The few remnants of Roman bathing culture that persisted into the Middle Ages were often localized and greatly simplified. Let us now gently shift our focus to the deeper currents of belief that permeated medieval European society, exploring the intricate reasons behind the widespread reluctance towards bathing. Beyond the practical constraints of economics and infrastructure, there lay a complex tapestry of medical theories, superstitions, and religious interpretations that coalesced into a profound fear of water and the act of bathing. This ancient Greek concept, heavily influenced by Hippocrates and later codified by Galen, formed the bedrock of all medical understanding for over 1,000 years. The physician, armed with this knowledge, would seek to restore balance through various interventions: bleeding, purging, dietary adjustments, and the careful regulation of external influences. The skin, according to humoral theory, was not merely a protective barrier, but a semi-permeable membrane through which the body regulated its internal environment. Firstly, it was feared that cold air or bad air could enter the body through these open pores, directly causing illness. Miasma theory, the idea that diseases were caused by noxious fumes or vapors arising from decaying organic matter, was prevalent. Dirt, or rather, the accumulated layers on the skin, was not always seen as purely negative. When plagues swept through towns and villages, decimating populations, the search for explanations often turned to supernatural causes, divine punishment, or the more tangible, yet misunderstood bad air. The body, seen as a temporary vessel, was less important than the immortal soul. Large quantities of hot water were a luxury, requiring significant amounts of fuel and labor. These occasional baths, however, stand in stark contrast to the sophisticated and ubiquitous Roman thermae. Their scarcity underscores the prevailing societal attitude. Even in these rare instances, the focus was often on therapeutic bathing for the sick or elderly, or a strictly practical cleansing after a particularly dirty journey, rather than routine personal hygiene. The very presence of a bath was a notable event, often requiring significant preparation, rather than an everyday occurrence. The isolated remnants of medieval bathing facilities whispered tales of limited use, a far cry from the daily rituals of the Roman era. If one did attempt to bathe, the water often cooled quickly, leading to the dreaded chill. It was a cultural tapestry woven from ignorance of germ theory, its observation of disease patterns, and a fundamental belief in the body's delicate internal balance. This pervasive fear ensured that the act of bathing remained a rare, often dreaded, and certainly not a refreshing part of medieval life, contributing significantly to the era's distinctive approach to personal cleanliness. The slow, cautious approach to water, often limited to superficial washes, was a direct consequence of this complex interplay of beliefs. Profound contrast to our modern understanding, where water is often seen as a source of health and purification. This quiet anxiety about water permeated the medieval world, shaping daily habits and perceptions of the body in profound and lasting ways. This visceral experience of becoming cold after a bath further reinforced the humoral theory's warnings about the loss of vital heat and the opening of pores. The cold, rather than a refreshing sensation, became a harbinger of potential illness, solidifying the idea that cold water was inherently perilous. The very sensation of cold, so often encountered after a bath, became a physical warning, a confirmation of the danger spoken of by learned men. Excessive attention to bodily comforts, including leisurely bathing, could be viewed as a sin of vanity or sensuality, a distraction from pious devotion. While ritual cleansing had its place in religious ceremonies, the daily pursuit of physical cleanliness was often seen as less significant than the cleansing of the soul through prayer and penance. Monastic orders, known for their rigorous asceticism, often minimized bathing, viewing it as a worldly indulgence. The concept of spiritual hygiene often superseded physical hygiene in the hierarchy of values, creating a moral imperative to sometimes neglect the body for the sake of the soul. In this climate of fear and ignorance, any activity that seemed to weaken the body or expose it to external influences became suspect. Bathing, with its direct contact with water and the perceived opening of pores, naturally fell into this category. The Black Plague, in particular, reinforced these fears. When people who had just bathed fell ill, or when public bathhouses were vectors for disease due to unsanitary practices, the anecdotal evidence further solidified the belief that bathing was inherently dangerous. The sight of illness following a bath would serve as a chilling confirmation of their deeply held beliefs about its perils. In a paradoxical twist, some believe that these layers offered a form of protection against the elements, a natural barrier against the penetration of disease-causing miasma. To strip away this layer through vigorous washing was, in this view, to leave the body exposed and defenseless. This was not a universally held belief, but it certainly contributed to the general reluctance to embrace frequent or thorough bathing, as the potential risks seemed to outweigh the perceived benefits. The rough texture of unwashed skin, the feeling of accumulated grime, might have paradoxically offered a sense of security against the invisible threats believed to circulate in the air. A stench in the air was seen as a direct carrier of disease. Therefore, exposing the body to the air, especially after a bath, when the pores were supposedly open, was considered an invitation for these harmful vapors to penetrate the body and disrupt the delicate humoral balance, leading to sickness. Imagine the anxiety this belief would instill. Every draft, every whiff of foul air, a potential gateway for illness if one's body was not properly sealed. The air itself, particularly stagnant or odorous air, was seen as a potential weapon against the body's internal harmony. Pores were seen as vital conduits for expelling harmful vapors and retaining essential internal warmth. The act of bathing, especially in cool or cold water, was thought to expand these pores excessively, making the body vulnerable. This vulnerability was not just a theoretical concept. It was a deeply felt apprehension, a sense of one's own physical boundaries being compromised by the very act of washing. And it was here in the realm of external influences that the fear of water found its root. The environment was seen as having a profound impact on the internal state of the body. Maintaining internal heat was considered crucial for health and vitality. Bathing, particularly with excessive water, was thought to dissipate this essential warmth, leaving the individual susceptible to chills, fever, and a general weakening of the constitution. A person who felt a chill after bathing might quickly attribute it to this loss of vital heat, reinforcing the dangerous perception of water. The fear was not just of superficial cold, but of a fundamental internal cooling that could upset the entire physiological equilibrium, leading to a cascade of ailments. The very act of shivering or feeling cold after a wash was interpreted as a direct physical manifestation of the body's inner defenses being breached. And water, with its inherent wet and cold qualities, was considered a powerful external agent that could easily disrupt the delicate humoral balance. It posited that the human body was composed of 4 fundamental fluids or humors: blood, yellow, bile, black bile, and phlegm. Each humor was associated with specific qualities: blood with hot and wet yellow bile, with hot and dry, black bile with cold and dry, and phlegm with cold and wet. Health, according to this theory, was maintained by a perfect balance of these humors within the body. Illness, conversely, arose from an imbalance, an excess or deficiency of one or more humors. The subtle shifts in one's mood, the onset of a fever, a sudden chill, all were interpreted through the lens of these invisible, internal fluids, constantly striving for equilibrium. This was not a simple aversion. It was a deeply ingrained cultural disposition, shaped by centuries of evolving thought and experience, a quiet but pervasive anxiety that touched almost every aspect of daily life, particularly when it came to personal care. The very presence of water, beyond its use for drinking or cooking, seemed to invoke a subtle apprehension in the medieval mind. At the heart of this fear lay the dominant medical paradigm of the era, the humoral theory. Imagine for a moment living in a world where every ache, every fever, every ailment was attributed to the intricate dance of these invisible fluids within you. Water, particularly cold water, was widely believed to open the pores of the skin. This vulnerability manifested in several ways. Secondly, and perhaps even more significantly, there was a widespread belief that the body's vital heat could escape through open pores. Furthermore, the very act of washing was sometimes associated with the removal of protective layers. Consider the prevailing understanding of infection. Without any knowledge of microorganisms, the transmission of disease was a profound mystery. Religious interpretations also played a nuanced role. While Christianity did not forbid cleanliness, the emphasis often shifted from physical purification to spiritual purity. The practical difficulties of heating water also contributed to this fear. Archaeological findings sometimes reveal rudimentary bathing facilities in medieval castles or monasteries, often small and infrequent. So, the fear of water in the medieval period was not simply a phobia, but a deeply rationalized apprehension, rooted in the accepted medical science of the day, reinforced by practical difficulties, and subtly influenced by religious asceticism. As our journey through the medieval landscape continues, let us turn our gaze from the widespread anxieties of the common folk to the privileged. Enclaves of the nobility, exploring how the fear of water and the peculiar practices of personal hygiene manifested within the grand walls of castles and manor houses. While the everyday lives of peasants were shaped by hard labor and limited resources, the elite, with their greater wealth and access to a wider array of goods, still largely adhered to the same prevailing beliefs about health and the dangers of water. These were highly prized commodities, often imported from the East, and served as a powerful tool in masking the body's natural odors. Imagine the delicate floral notes of rosewater, the earthy spice of frankincense, or the sweet warmth of musk, meticulously applied to skin and garments. Instead, dry powders, often scented with herbs or spices, would be sprinkled into the hair to absorb grease and refresh its scent. For and after meals, for instance, it was common for basins of water, often scented, to be offered for the washing of hands. These would involve enclosed heated rooms where individuals could perspire profusely, often followed by a dry rub. The idea was to expel impurities through sweat, a method considered safer than water immersion by some, as it avoided the perceived danger of opening pores to cold air. Their wealth allowed them to employ more sophisticated methods of masking odors and maintaining superficial cleanliness. Through the liberal use of perfumes, the frequent changing of fine linens, and the careful dry care of hair. However, the fundamental fear of immersion and the humoral theory's warnings permeated even their privileged lives, ensuring that the full bath remained a rare, almost medicinal, rather than a routine and refreshing experience. Their world was one of carefully managed scents and appearances, a testament to an era where the unseen forces of miasma and humoral balance held sway over the daily habits of even the most powerful individuals. The quiet, lingering presence of their unique cleanliness would permeate their lives, a subtle reminder of the era's distinct understanding of the body. This form of cleansing, however, was also far from universal and remained a specialized, infrequent practice. The dry heat, the beads of sweat forming on the skin, the subsequent rub with a rough cloth. These were sensations of a cleansing that avoided the perceived dangers of water. This was a public act, a display of good manners, and a practical measure to remove dirt from eating. While public baths had declined in Europe, they continued to flourish in the Islamic world, where cleanliness was deeply intertwined with religious practice and daily life. The Hammams of the Middle East were vibrant, bustling centers of hygiene and social interaction, where elaborate rituals of washing, scrubbing, and massage were commonplace. To a medieval European, the customs of the Saracens were often viewed with suspicion, and their bathing habits, while undeniably thorough, were seen as alien and potentially morally questionable. This cultural divide further cemented the European aversion to public communal bathing. The vivid descriptions of hammams, with their steamy air and shared rituals, would have seemed utterly foreign to a European noble, accustomed to a much more private and infrequent approach to bathing. However, this hand-washing was rarely accompanied by a full-bodied bath. It was a specific, targeted act of cleansing driven by etiquette and the practicalities of communal dining, rather than a comprehensive approach to personal hygiene. The water, often lukewarm and fragrant, would be poured over the hands, a gentle rinse rather than a thorough scrub. The feel of the warm, scented water over the hands, a brief moment of refreshing sensation, was a polite interlude in their daily routines. Brushing, often with fine wooden or bone combs, was a daily ritual designed to detangle and distribute natural oils, but not to cleanse with water. The long flowing hair of a lady or the carefully coiffed locks of a lord would be tended to with dry methods, ensuring a semblance of order and presentability without the perceived risk of a full wash. The delicate scent of dried herbs wafting from carefully brushed hair would be another subtle layer in their aromatic presentation. These scents were not simply for personal enjoyment. They were a social statement, a way to distinguish oneself from the common rabble, whose simpler lives afforded no such luxuries. A nobleman might wear a sachet of dried herbs tucked into his doublet, or rub his hands with a pomander filled with fragrant spices, all designed to create an aromatic halo around him. The air around them would be subtly different, a more refined and cultivated blend of smells, but still a masking, not an elimination. The very act of applying these precious substances was a quiet ritual, a daily affirmation of their status and their desire to present a pleasant facade to the world. Their cleanliness, therefore, was not achieved through frequent immersion, but through an elaborate, often paradoxical, tapestry of perfumes, fine linens. While the outer garments might be elaborate and worn for extended periods, the inner layers of linen were changed more frequently. It was believed that linen, being breathable and absorbent, could draw impurities and sweat away from the body. This provided a superficial sense of freshness, as the clean fabric against the skin would feel more pleasant, even if the skin underneath remained unwashed. Imagine the tactile difference of slipping into freshly laundered linen after days in heavier, less breathable fabrics. This was their primary form of washing, the frequent changing of underclothing, seen as a sufficient means of refreshing the body without the perceived dangers of water. The crispness of fresh linen, the gentle rustle as one moved, these were the sensations of their particular brand of cleanliness. And the strategic layering of scents designed to mask rather than truly cleanse. The air within their chambers, while perhaps less rustic, still carried the subtle undertones of a world where deep washing was a rarity. Imagine the great hall of a medieval castle, dimly lit by flickering torches and the glow of a large fireplace. The air, though grander in its scale, would still carry its own distinctive blend of aromas. The scent of roasting meat from the kitchens, the earthy smell of rush-strewn floors, and the subtle, persistent presence of unwashed bodies, even noble ones. A lord or lady, though clothed in rich fabrics and adorned with jewels, would likely carry a personal scent that, while perhaps less pungent than a peasant's, was still far from what we would consider fresh. The bath for them remained a rare and often ritualistic event rather than a routine. The very walls, imbued with centuries of human presence, would hold the memory of these complex, layered odors. When a noble person did undertake the act of bathing, it was a complex logistical operation. Unlike the common folk, they had access to servants who could carry large quantities of water and sufficient fuel to heat it. A large wooden tub, perhaps lined with linen, would be brought into a private chamber. Yet even with these resources, the process was slow and deliberate. Water would be heated over the hearth, bucket by painstaking bucket, and then carried to the tub. The bath itself would often be a quick immersion, perhaps with fragrant herbs or rose petals added to the water to mask odors and provide a pleasing aroma. Rather than a deep scrubbing cleanse, the focus was often on comfort and the sensory experience, a brief moment of warmth and fragrant steam, rather than a rigorous pursuit of hygiene in the modern sense. The cleanliness achieved was more aesthetic than truly sanitary. The gentle scent of herbs and flowers mingling with the rising steam would create a fleeting sensation of freshness, quickly fading once the bath concluded. The real art of noble cleanliness lay in the strategic use of perfumes and aromatics. Beyond perfumes, fine linens and clean undergarments played a crucial role in the noble's perception of cleanliness. The noble's concern for their appearance extended to their hair. While elaborate hairstyles and head coverings were common, actual hair washing was infrequent. Furthermore, the social rituals of the elite often incorporated a form of superficial cleansing. The concept of a sweat bath or sauna-like experience, though less common than in other cultures, did exist in some aristocratic settings. The contrast with public bathing in other, often vilified, societies further highlights the European medieval elite's reluctance. In essence, the noblesse approach to personal hygiene in the European Middle Ages was a delicate balance between maintaining semblance of presentability and adhering to the prevailing beliefs about health and the dangers of water. Let us now gently submerge ourselves back into the rhythms of medieval daily life, extending our contemplation of how deeply interwoven were the practicalities of existence with the spiritual landscape, particularly in relation to the persistent state of unwashedness. Imagine the soft, diffused light filtering through the small, often unglazed windows of a peasant's cottage, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air, a visible testament to the dry, earthy environment. Here, amidst the smells of wood smoke, damp earth, and the animals housed nearby, the concept of hygiene was not a pursuit of sterile cleanliness, but rather a negotiation with the inevitable presence of dirt framed by a profound sense of devotion. Families lived in close quarters, often sharing beds and certainly sharing the same limited air. The pervasive human scent, subtle and unmasked, was simply part of the ambient environment. There was no expectation of individual aromatic freshness. Instead, a collective human presence permeated the small enclosed spaces. The air would be heavy with the scent of beeswax candles, old incense, and the subtle, collective aroma of many unwashed bodies. Yet within this space, a sense of profound reverence and spiritual communion would prevail. The focus was on the ritual, the words of the priest, the sacred images, and the shared faith that bound the community together. Swarms of flies around food, animals, and people were common. The constant buzzing, the sensation of insects landing on skin and food. These were simply part of the natural order, largely accepted as an unavoidable aspect of existence. There was no scientific understanding of how these creatures transmitted disease, so their presence, while perhaps annoying, was not linked to the same hygienic concerns we would have today. The subtle irritation of buzzing insects, the occasional tickle of tiny legs on the skin, were simply part of the ambient sensory world, a quiet reminder of the unfiltered natural environment. The physical state of one's body was secondary to the purity of one's intentions and the devotion of one's heart. It was a world where physical dirt was an almost inevitable companion, a consequence of living in close proximity to the earth, animals, and one another. Without the technologies or scientific understanding that would later transform hygiene practices, but it was also a world profoundly shaped by faith, where the cleansing of the soul took precedence over the cleansing of the skin, and where the rituals of devotion offered a different kind of purification, a spiritual washing that was considered far more enduring and significant than any physical bath. The quiet acceptance of their unwashed state was not a sign of apathy, but a reflection of a deeply ingrained cultural and spiritual worldview. The rhythm of their lives, deeply connected to the earth and the heavens, found its own unique form of purity: the kneeling, the prostrating, the crossing of oneself. These were the physical expressions of an inner spiritual cleansing, a different kind of ablution. The very act of bowing one's head, of clasping one's hands in prayer, represented a cleansing of the spirit that was deemed far more essential than any washing of the flesh. The warmth of bodies huddled together for comfort against the cold, the shared breath in the close air. These were the realities of intimacy in a world without personal hygiene as we know it. Imagine walking for days or weeks through dusty roads, sleeping outdoors, with no access to proper washing facilities. The pilgrim's body would accumulate layers of grime, sweat, and road dust. Yet this physical hardship, this deepening of the unwashed state, was often seen as a form of penance, a physical sacrifice that contributed to the spiritual merit of the journey. The dirt was not a sign of moral failing, but a mark of pious endurance. The relief and spiritual renewal at the journey's end would be deeply felt, a purification of the soul that transcended any physical state. The very feel of the road dust clinging to skin and clothing, the persistent fatigue, all contributed to the sense of sacrifice for a higher spiritual purpose. The very idea of a separate, private space for an individual to cleanse their entire body would have been an unimaginable luxury, a concept beyond the practical realities of their lives. The saying of grace before meals, the sign of the cross, the display of a crucifix, or a saint's image. These were constant reminders of the sacred dimension of everyday life. And the body, though a temporary vessel, was ultimately a creation of God, and its care was framed within that understanding. While not prioritizing physical cleanliness in the modern sense, there was an underlying respect for the body's natural state and its capacity for labor and devotion. The simple act of breaking bread sanctified by prayer brought a different kind of purity to the table, a spiritual nourishment that transcended the physical. The constant, close presence of others meant that one's personal state was always, to some degree, a shared reality. The air itself, thick with the scent of human and animal life, would carry a quiet weight, a constant reminder of their close relationship with the natural world. The process of laundering garments was arduous, requiring large quantities of water, soap, and significant physical labor to beat and scrub the fabrics. Therefore, clothes were changed only when absolutely necessary, and their constant wear meant they absorbed the scents and dirt of daily life. The fabric, often coarse wool or rough linen, would gradually become stiffer, heavier, and darker with accumulated grime. The tactile sensation of these well-worn, unwashed garments against the skin was a constant presence, familiar weight and texture that became an extension of the body itself. The faint, lingering scent of wood smoke and human presence would cling to these garments, a constant, comforting reminder of home and daily activity. The morning ablutions, if they occurred at all, were far removed from any modern notion of a refreshing shower or bath. For the medieval peasant, devotion was not a compartmentalized activity, but permeated every aspect of existence. The church, often the grandest building in the village, served as the focal point for communal life and spiritual purification. While the body might remain physically soiled, the soul was constantly being tended to through prayer, confession, and participation in the sacraments. The focus on inner purity often overshadowed the concern for external spotlessness. The act of receiving communion, for instance, required a state of grace, a spiritual cleansing that was deemed far more significant than the absence of dirt on one's hands. The quiet murmur of prayers, the solemnity of the rituals, created a profound sense of inner cleansing that transcended any external state. They were quick, perfunctory gestures, often involving a basin of cold water drawn from the well or a nearby stream, used to splash the face and hands. This was not a cleansing to feel invigorated, but rather a practical act to remove the most visible traces of sleep and prepare for the day's labors. The water, cold against the skin, was a simple utility, not a source of comfort or extensive purification. The sensation was immediate and stark. A brief shock to the system, quickly followed by the resumption of daily chores. The brisk chill of the water against the skin served as a simple wake-up, a brief punctuation mark before the day's work truly began, a fleeting moment of contact with the precious cold fluid. Consider the hands, those indispensable instruments of daily survival. They tilled the fields, milked the cows, spun the wool, and prepared the meager meals. They were constantly in contact with the soil, with animal waste, with rough fibers and raw ingredients. The dirt that accumulated on them was not merely a superficial layer, but became an almost intrinsic part of their texture, a testament to the ceaseless toil. Yet the washing of these hands, though certainly done before eating or before engaging in sacred rituals, was not a constant, pervasive habit. The dirt, to a certain extent, was simply accepted, a mark of one's engagement with the physical world. The feeling of rough, calloused hands ingrained with the earth was a familiar sensation, a constant reminder of the physical demands of their existence. The very lines and contours of the hand would carry the faint, earthy scent of their daily engagement with the soil. The concept of personal space and privacy, as we have already gently explored, was almost non-existent. Clothing, too, was worn until it was threadbare, often for weeks or even months without a thorough wash. Yet, amidst this pervasive physical dirt, there was a profound engagement with spiritual cleanliness. Imagine attending Mass in a crowded, dimly lit church. Pilgrimages, arduous journeys to sacred sites, were another profound expression of devotion that often involved sustained periods of physical discomfort and, inevitably, a deepening of personal dirt. Even within the home, small rituals reflected this blend of the practical and the spiritual. The persistent presence of flies and other insects was also a reality of medieval life, and another factor in the intimate relationship with dirt. Thus, the medieval peasant's daily life was a testament to a different relationship with cleanliness. As we continue our gentle journey, let us now turn our attention to a particular facet of medieval life that profoundly shaped attitudes towards the body and personal hygiene. The widespread veneration of saints and the powerful ideal of asceticism. These were the tales of saints, men and women, who had dedicated their lives to God, often through extreme forms of self-discipline and renunciation of worldly pleasures. Their lives served as powerful exemplars, models of spiritual striving that profoundly influenced the popular imagination and shaped collective values, including those related to the body and its care. We hear of figures like Saint Simeon Stylites, who famously lived atop a pillar for decades, exposed to the elements, never descending, never fully washing. His body, according to accounts, became a testament to his piety, covered in grime and infested with vermin, yet viewed by his admirers not as repulsive, but as a visible mark of his profound holiness and his victory over worldly desires. If saints, the very embodiment of spiritual perfection, chose to live in a state of physical uncleanliness, then how important could personal hygiene truly be for the average person? Monks and nuns, dedicating themselves to prayer and labor, often lived lives of disciplined simplicity. While basic practical cleanliness for health was sometimes encouraged in a rudimentary way, elaborate bathing rituals were generally eschewed. The communal nature of monastic life, the shared spaces and routines, further diminished the opportunity for extensive private bathing. The ashes to ashes, dust to dust, Understanding of human mortality meant that the body was inherently tied to the earth, to decay, and to impermanence. To be too concerned with its fleeting cleanliness might be seen as a denial of this fundamental truth. Humility in this context extended to a quiet acceptance of the body's natural state, including its tendency towards physical imperfection and the accumulation of grime. The earthy scent of the grave, the humble origins of human flesh, these were constant reminders of mortality, diminishing the importance of superficial cleanliness. Their focus was on spiritual discipline, intellectual pursuit, and agricultural labor, not on the pleasures of the bath. They provided powerful spiritual justification for the neglect of the body, elevating spiritual purity above physical cleanliness. The images of unwashed saints, revered and celebrated, conveyed a silent message. True holiness lay not in external spotlessness, but in the internal dedication of the soul. This cultural conditioning, quietly reinforced by daily sermons and popular stories, ensured that the widespread fear of water and the rare practice of bathing remained deeply embedded within the fabric of medieval European society. A testament to the enduring power of belief over material comfort. The quiet stories of spiritual triumphs over worldly desires resonated deeply, weaving a narrative where physical neglect could paradoxically lead to a higher form of purity. The quiet routines of monastic life, the simple meals, the hours of prayer, all contributed to a different kind of purity, one measured by devotion rather than by physical appearance. The idea emerged that too much attention to the body, too much focus on its comforts, sins of the flesh, such as lust or gluttony, were seen as far more damaging to the soul than the simple presence of physical dirt. When pestilences swept through the land, they were often interpreted as divine punishment for sin. In such times, increased prayer, fasting, and acts of penance were encouraged, rather than a focus on physical cleanliness. The belief was that by purifying one's soul, one might appease God and avert illness. The physical discomfort of an unwashed state might even be seen as a form of penance, a quiet offering to God in times of widespread sickness. The silent suffering, the constant awareness of bodily discomfort, became a form of prayer in itself. Confession and penance were the means by which true cleansing occurred, a washing away of spiritual impurities. Water, in a religious context, was most powerful when used ritually. In baptism, for instance, symbolizing spiritual rebirth, and the washing away of original sin, or in the blessing of holy water, imbued with spiritual power. These were profound symbolic acts, far removed from the mundane act of washing one's body for comfort or physical cleanliness. The gentle sprinkle of holy water, the solemn words of the priest, conveyed a sense of cleansing that was entirely spiritual in nature. Appearance could be a sign of vanity, a distraction from the more important task of preparing one's soul for the afterlife. The quiet acceptance of one's own bodily state, whatever its level of cleanliness, became implicitly linked to humility and spiritual focus. The silent endurance of his body, perched high above the world, was a powerful symbol of spiritual elevation, a quiet challenge to conventional notions of comfort and cleanliness. The very texture of the air around him, surely heavy with the scent of unwashed humanity and the dust of years, would be infused with a spiritual aura in the eyes of his devotees. The very texture of these stories, often told with a quiet solemnity, would emphasize the spiritual triumph over worldly concerns. And simplicity, living in close communion with nature, and neglecting many bodily comforts. While he did not actively promote squalor, his emphasis on humility and detachment from worldly possessions naturally led to a less fastidious approach to personal care. The very act of touching lepers, embracing the sick and the marginalized, often involved intimate contact with bodies that were far from clean. Yet this contact was seen as an act of profound Christian charity, a spiritual purification rather than a physical defilement. The gentle touch of his hands, unwashed, yet filled with compassion, would be a source of comfort to those he served. This narrative delves into how the lives of holy figures, the practices of self-denial they embodied, reinforced a societal perception that often viewed rigorous physical cleanliness as not only unnecessary, but sometimes even morally suspect. This often involved fasting, sleep deprivation, long hours of prayer, and crucially, a deliberate neglect of bodily comforts and cleanliness. The flesh, in this theological framework, was often seen as a source of temptation, a vessel for sin, and something to be subdued rather than indulged. By denying the body its comforts, including the pleasure of a bath, ascetics believed they were strengthening their spirit and demonstrating their devotion to God. The discomfort of an unwashed body, the persistent itch of unkempt hair, these were seen not as burdens, but as quiet tools for spiritual discipline, a constant reminder of the fleeting nature of physical sensation. The air of quiet reverence that surrounded these figures, despite their often unkempt physical state, was a testament to the powerful hold their spiritual ideals had on the medieval imagination. Imagine, if you will, the stories whispered in hushed tones in village churches, recounted by traveling friars, or read aloud from illuminated manuscripts in monastic cloisters. Central to many of these saintly narratives was the concept of asceticism, a rigorous program of self-denial aimed at purifying the soul and drawing closer to God. Consider the vivid, sometimes unsettling, descriptions of saintly lives that circulated widely. Another poignant example is Saint Francis of Assisi, though less extreme than the Desert Fathers, who famously embraced a life of radical poverty. These narratives, whether of extreme asceticism or humble simplicity, filtered down into wider medieval society, shaping popular perceptions. Monastic life, which became a cornerstone of medieval Christianity, also reinforced these ideals. The emphasis on spiritual purity also led to a different understanding of sin and defilement. The persistent fear of disease, also discussed previously, intertwined with these religious notions. Furthermore, the very concept of dirt often took on a symbolic meaning. Thus, the lives of medieval saints and the pervasive ideal of asceticism played a profound, albeit subtle, role in shaping the medieval attitude towards bathing. As we continue our gentle exploration of medieval life, let us now turn our attention to an intriguing aspect of their sensory world: the pervasive and often elaborate use of perfumes, potpourri, and other aromatics. This was a world where bad smells were an inescapable reality, a constant presence that permeated every corner of life. From the bustling city streets to the quiet chambers of the elite, without the benefits of modern sanitation and frequent personal washing, the medieval solution to unpleasant odors was not to eliminate them, but to cleverly and artfully mask them. This offers a fascinating glimpse into their cultural priorities and the ingenuity born from necessity. Imagine, if you will, the sensory landscape of a medieval town. These were small, often exquisitely crafted spheres made of precious metals, pierced with tiny holes and filled with fragrant substances. Rosewater, a simple distillate of rose petals, was particularly popular, used to refresh the face and hands, or to lightly scent garments and linens. It was a gentle, natural fragrance, far removed from the strong, synthetic perfumes of today. The heavy, sweet smoke of frankincense and myrrh, rising to the vaulted ceilings, created an enveloping aroma that was associated with sanctity and reverence. It was a world where the nose was constantly engaged, often unpleasantly, and where the strategic deployment of pleasant aromas became a necessary art form. This reliance on scent, rather than soap and water, highlights the fundamental difference in their approach to hygiene. They sought to manage the sensory environment to make it more bearable, rather than to eradicate the source of the odors. While not intended to mask everyday odors, it certainly contributed to a distinct olfactory experience within religious spaces, often overpowering other scents. The visible plumes of smoke, the slow, lingering scent, created a profound sensory experience that elevated the atmosphere. It reveals a society that, lacking the means and the understanding for thorough physical cleanliness, developed ingenious methods to manage and mask the omnipresent odors of daily life. This was not a futile attempt to achieve modern hygiene, but rather a pragmatic and culturally significant effort to create spaces of comfort and pleasantness. Within a world where bad smells were an undeniable reality, the subtle whispers of rose, lavender, and musk carried on the gentle breeze, offered a temporary, aromatic veil over the unwashed realities of medieval existence, a quiet, fragrant counterpoint to the prevailing earthy scents. These scented waters provided a fleeting sense of freshness, a brief moment of aromatic escape. Imagine the cool, soft splash of rose water on the skin, leaving behind a delicate, calming floral scent. The discovery of these objects offers a quiet glimpse into the intimate daily practices of medieval people, reminding us that even amidst the challenges of their unwashed world, they sought comfort and beauty in the power of scent. The delicate craftsmanship of these items, often adorned with subtle patterns or engravings, speaks of the value placed on these aromatic treasures. The feeling of the cool liquid evaporating slowly would offer a temporary sensation of renewal. Sometimes they were simple oranges studded with cloves, a more accessible version of the same principle. Floors in noble homes were often strewn with fresh rushes, which were then periodically replaced. Before being spread, these rushes might be mixed with sweet-smelling herbs like mint, lavender, and chamomile. As people walked across the floor, the herbs would be crushed, releasing their natural fragrance, helping to freshen the air and mask the underlying odors of the earth and lingering refuse. This was a continuous, subtle form of environmental scenting, a quiet, pervasive effort to make indoor spaces more tolerable. The gentle rustle of the rushes underfoot, releasing their herbaceous scent, would be a constant, calming auditory and olfactory presence. Nobles would carry these pomanders, or wear them suspended from their belts or around their necks. The idea was that as they moved, the pomander would gently release its scent, creating a small personal cloud of fragrance that would subtly counteract the surrounding odors. Imagine the delicate clinking of a silver pomander releasing a gentle waft of musk or ambergris as a lady moved through a crowded room. The sense of touch, the smooth, cool metal combined with the subtle scent, would be a constant, reassuring presence. The narrow streets would be a pungent tapestry of smells, the sharp tang of animal waste from horses and livestock, the sweet decay of refuse thrown from windows. Natural ingredients were the key. Fragrant herbs, spices, flower petals, and resins. Imagine the delicate sweetness of dried rose petals, the warm spice of cloves and cinnamon, pungent notes of rosemary and lavender, or the deep earthy richness of frankincense and myrrh. These were not just pleasant additions. They were strategic weapons in the ongoing battle against pervasive stench. The careful preparation of these ingredients, drying them, grinding them, extracting their essences through simple distillation or infusion in oils, was a quiet, meticulous craft. The acrid smoke from countless cooking fires, the lingering scent of unwashed bodies in crowded markets, and the unmistakable aroma of tanneries and butcher stalls. Dried flowers, herbs, and spices were collected, mixed, and placed in decorative bowls or small sachets throughout homes, particularly in the wealthier households. These fragrant mixtures were designed to subtly scent the air, creating small islands of more pleasant aroma amidst the general miasma. Imagine walking into a great hall and catching a faint sweet scent of dried lavender and rose, a brief respite from the more aggressive odors outside. The visual appeal of these arrangements, often in elegant wooden or ceramic vessels, added to their allure, turning a practical necessity into a decorative element. The subtle release of these natural scents, slowly permeating the air, created a constant, gentle background fragrance. It was a world that assailed the nostrils with a constant, unfiltered stream of natural and human-made odors. To live in this world meant developing a tolerance, a quiet acceptance of this olfactory reality. In response to this, the art of perfumery, though different from modern chemical formulations, became remarkably sophisticated. Potpourri, as we know it, had its medieval antecedents in various forms. Pomanders were another fascinating development. Perfumed oils and waters were also widely used. Beyond personal application, aromatics were integrated into the environment. The use of incense in churches was also a pervasive form of atmospheric purification, though primarily for spiritual rather than hygienic reasons. The very concept of clean in medieval times, therefore, extended beyond physical cleanliness to an olfactory cleanliness achieved through masking. Archaeological finds sometimes include small, intricately carved caskets or ceramic pots, which may have been used to hold these fragrant mixtures. In conclusion, the widespread use of perfumes, potpourri, and other aromatics in medieval Europe was a quiet testament to a challenging sensory environment. Let us now gently draw a contrast, shifting our gaze beyond the confines of medieval Europe to a different world where bathing was not feared but embraced as a central pillar of life. The vibrant and sophisticated world of the Islamic Empire and its ubiquitous Turkish baths, or hammams. This exploration provides a profound counterpoint to the European narrative, highlighting a significant hygiene divide that separated the two civilizations during the medieval period. Deeply rooted in differing cultural, religious, and scientific understandings. Imagine yourself in a bustling city of the Islamic world, perhaps Baghdad or Cordoba many centuries ago. For Muslims, ritual purity is a prerequisite for prayer and many other acts of worship. The Quran and Hadith frequently emphasize cleanliness, both physical and spiritual. Washing before prayers was a daily requirement, making regular access to clean water and bathing facilities essential. This religious imperative provided a powerful and constant motivation for maintaining personal hygiene, far beyond the sporadic needs of medieval Europeans. While Europeans feared opening their pores to bad air and losing vital heat, Islamic cultures embraced steam and hot water, believing them to be beneficial for health and purification. While European asceticism sometimes glorified physical discomfort, Islamic piety often emphasized cleanliness as a path to spiritual grace. The philosophical and practical approaches to the body and its interaction with water were fundamentally different, creating a distinct hygiene divide. The very act of washing was a spiritual act, imbued with meaning and reverence. While some might have appreciated the physical relief of a good wash, the communal nature and the thoroughness of the cleansing sometimes clashed with their own deeply ingrained cultural norms and fears regarding water. For many, it was an alien practice, a sign of foreign customs that were not to be emulated. The very smells of the hammams, the unfamiliar blends of steam, soap, and human presence, would have been a novel and perhaps unsettling sensory experience for European visitors. The air here would be filled with the rich scent of spices, the murmur of many languages, and the distant call to prayer. Stands as a quiet testament to this vibrant bathing culture that once flourished. It highlights a society where religious imperative, advanced infrastructure, and a sophisticated understanding of well-being converged to create a culture that embraced regular, thorough cleansing. This stands in quiet yet stark contrast to the European medieval world where fear limited resources, and differing beliefs led to a rare and often dreaded relationship with the bath. This hygiene divide was not merely a matter of personal preference. It reflected fundamental differences in worldviews, shaping daily life and public health across vast geographical and cultural landscapes. The warm, steamy air of the hammam, with its promise of refreshment and community, offers a quiet whisper of what might have been. Had Europe's relationship with water not taken such a cautious turn? Even in lands where Islamic rule receded, the physical structures of the hammams often remained, sometimes repurposed, sometimes simply left as ruins. Echoing a past when cleanliness was a highly valued public good, the intricate water channels, the remnants of heating systems, and the characteristic domed ceilings whisper stories of a different way of life, a different relationship with water and the body, and fountains to ensure a reliable supply of fresh water for both domestic use and the numerous hammams. The engineering prowess that had built the Roman baths was, in many ways, preserved. The regular removal of dirt, sweat, and dead skin, even without understanding the microscopic agents of disease, would have reduced the incidence of skin infections, parasites, and the general burden of grime that afflicted European populations. The simple act of regular, thorough washing, even if the underlying science was not understood, had tangible benefits for well-being, and advanced in the Islamic world, ensuring that these vital public facilities could be maintained and widely used. The constant flow of fresh, clean water, piped efficiently throughout the cities, was a testament to this societal priority. Rising prominently in every neighborhood, often adorned with elegant domes and intricate tilework, stood the hammams. They served as venues for gossip, business dealings, and social bonding. Women often had separate times or facilities, allowing them a rare opportunity for social interaction outside the home. The hammam was a place of rejuvenation, not just for the body, but for the spirit and social connections. The laughter, the quiet conversations, the shared experience of relaxation created a warm and inviting atmosphere. These were not merely places for physical cleansing. They were integral to social life, public health, and religious practice, far exceeding the utilitarian or sparse bathing facilities found in most of medieval Europe. The very architecture of the hammam, often grand and inviting, spoke of its central importance. The experience within a hammam was a leisurely and immersive ritual designed for deep cleansing and relaxation. One would typically move through a series of progressively warmer rooms. First, a cool resting room, then a warm room for acclimatization, followed by the main hot room, the harara. Filled with steam and often featuring a heated marble slab in the center. Here, one would perspire profusely, allowing the body to relax and impurities to be released. This was often followed by vigorous scrubbing with a coarse mitt to remove dead skin and a luxurious massage. Finally, a cooling rinse and a return to the cooler resting room for tea and conversation. The sounds of water splashing, the soft murmur of voices, and the gentle scraping of the keys against skin would create a soothing, ambient soundscape. The emphasis in Islamic culture on cleanliness was deeply rooted in religious tenets. This religious value translated into practical infrastructure. Cities throughout the Islamic world invested heavily in sophisticated water systems, aqueducts, cisterns. The social function of the hammam was also profound. They were communal gathering places, akin to the Roman baths of old, but adapted to Islamic social norms. From a practical health perspective, although germ theory was unknown, the consistent practice of full-body washing in hammams undoubtedly contributed to better public health outcomes in Islamic societies compared to medieval Europe. The contrast with medieval Europe could not be starker. European travelers and crusaders who encountered these hammams often reacted with a mixture of fascination and discomfort. Archaeological evidence in the form of ruined hammams in former Islamic territories in summary. The Turkish bath or hammam represents a profound counter-narrative to the European medieval experience of bathing. As we gently turn another page in our quiet chronicle of medieval life, let us immerse ourselves in the nuanced tapestry of daily existence, focusing on the subtle, pervasive presence of the sense of the seasons and the land, and how these natural aromas shaped the medieval understanding of their bodies and their environment, often in lieu of water-based cleansing. The delicate fragrance of early wildflowers, the sweet smell of budding trees, and the light, clean scent of spring rains would briefly cleanse the air, but also usher in new activities that added their own smells. The turning of the soil, the faint scent of animal manure as fields were prepared. The air would grow crisp, carrying the sweet, decaying scent of fallen leaves, the earthy smell of harvested root vegetables stored in cellars, and the rich, smoky aroma of fires burning wood and peat. The sharp, clean smell of cold air, sometimes mingled with the metallic temps of snow. Like today, where we often seek to isolate ourselves from natural odors, the medieval person was intimately connected to them. Specific herbs were gathered at certain times of the year, their properties understood through centuries of empirical observation and folklore. While bad air was feared, opening windows in cold weather was often avoided for fear of inviting chills and illness. So ventilation was limited, leading to a buildup of indoor smells. The natural scents of the outdoors, therefore, were fleeting visitors, only truly embraced during warmer months, when doors and windows might be left ajar. The occasional gust of clean wind carrying the scent of distant fields or woods would be a brief, refreshing interlude in the otherwise heavy indoor air. Rosemary, thyme, sage. These were not just culinary ingredients, the slow simmering of stews over an open fire, the baking of coarse bread. The body was continuously exposed to and absorbed the sense of its environment. Cleanliness was less about erasing these natural odors and more about managing the most offensive ones through the use of strong, hot, pleasant natural aromatics. The prevailing mindset was one of adaptation and quiet acceptance of the natural world. Rather than attempting to control or eliminate its pervasive sensory presence, the rhythm of their lives was inextricably linked to these smells, a constant quiet dialogue with the land and the changing seasons. The quiet understanding was that the body was part of the earth, and thus its scent would naturally reflect that deep connection, constant subtle whisper of their place in the world. The preservation of meats through smoking or salting, all these activities release their own powerful aromas, further layering the olfactory landscape of the medieval home. The warm, comforting scent of hearth cooking would be a constant presence, a promise of sustenance and warmth. But powerful aromatic plants, believed to ward off evil, purify the air, or treat ailments. Bundles of dried herbs might hang from rafters, slowly releasing their protective and pleasant aromas. A quiet reassurance in the face of unseen threats. The subtle rustle of these dried herbs, the faint scent they released, would be a constant, gentle presence in the home. Their clothing worn for long periods would absorb these seasonal aromas, becoming a living chronicle of their environment. The lingering scent of damp earth, of smoke, of animals would cling to them, not as a mark of shame, but as a natural consequence of their existence. The very fabric of their lives was woven with these environmental odors. Inside, the pervasive, comforting aroma of wood smoke from the hearth would dominate, mingled with the faint, persistent scent of stored grains and dried meats. The damp earth outside, now frozen or covered in snow, would give off a muffled, almost scentless presence. The focus would shift inwards to the warmth and enclosed spaces where human and animal presence, unmasked by ventilation, would become more concentrated. The feel of the cold air on the face, the stillness of the landscape, would create a profound sense of quiet and introspection. The faint temps of fermenting fruits from cider or wine production would mingle with the cooler, cleaner air. As animals were brought closer to human dwellings for winter, their presence would contribute its own distinct, comforting smell of warmth and life. The tactile sensation of dry, rustling leaves underfoot, the crispness of the air, would signal the changing light and the coming of the quiet, darker days. This was a time of renewal, but also of fresh exposure to the elements, grounding the body intimately with the land. The feel of soft, damp earth underfoot, the scent of fresh growth, signal the arrival of warmer days and new opportunities for labor. Imagine the slow, cyclical progression of the year, each season bringing its own unique olfactory signature, an ever-changing backdrop to their unwashed reality. The air itself was a dynamic canvas of natural odors, shifting with the sun and the rain. In spring, as the snow melted and the earth thawed, the air would carry the damp, earthy scent of awakening soil. Mingled with the fresh, slightly bitter aroma of new shoots and emerging green leaves. As summer ripened, the scents grew stronger and more abundant. The heavy sweetness of blooming flowers, the rich aroma of ripening grain, and the sharp smell of pine forests would fill the air. But alongside these pleasant fragrances, the heat would intensify other less agreeable odors. The stronger scent of unwashed bodies as sweat accumulated, the distinct smell of crowded markets, where produce and animals mingled, in the pervasive aroma of drying hay and straw. The sun, a constant presence, would bake the earth, intensifying these smells. To the medieval person, these were simply the smells of summer. The natural effluvium of life lived closely with the land and with one another. The feel of warm dust on the skin, the stickiness of sweat, these were constant companions of the summer months. Then came autumn, a time of harvest and preparation for the cold months ahead. Finally, winter would descend, bringing with it a different set of scents. Throughout these seasonal cycles, the medieval body was constantly interacting with these natural scents. Herbs and plants were not just for scenting, they were also vital for medieval medicine and belief. The concept of fresh air was understood differently too. Even the process of cooking would contribute to the overall scent profile. The sensory experience of the medieval world was therefore deeply holistic and less filtered than our own. As we drift onward in our exploration, let us now turn to one of the most cataclysmic events in medieval history, an event so profound that it subtly, yet undeniably, began to reshape the very attitudes towards cleanliness and the body, even if the underlying scientific understanding remained absent. The arrival and devastating impact of the Black Death. This narrative explores how the terrifying reality of plague and the desperate attempts to combat it began to introduce new, albeit often misguided, ideas about hygiene and public health, slowly stirring a fear of communal spaces. Imagine the sudden, inexplicable arrival of a shadow, a creeping terror that swept across Europe in the mid-14th century. The Black Death, primarily caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, is manifested in horrifying ways. Swollen black buboes in the armpits and groin, fever, vomiting, and a swift, agonizing death. It spared no one, striking down peasants and nobles, young and old, with indiscriminate fury. People noticed that areas with cleaner conditions, or individuals who practiced some form of rudimentary cleaning, sometimes fared better. If bad air caused the plague, then good, strong-smelling air might repel it. People began to carry posies of fragrant herbs, known as nosegays, or fill pomanders with spices like cloves and nutmeg, holding them to their noses when venturing outdoors. While some might have seen them as places for cleansing, others saw them as dangerous gathering points for sick. This did not immediately lead to an embrace of physical hygiene, but it did sow seeds of doubt about the absolute primacy of spiritual over physical well-being. The constant proximity to death, the arbitrary nature of its selection, the overwhelming sense of helplessness, would linger for generations. This deep trauma, while not directly leading to modern hygiene practices, did create a heightened awareness of public health, albeit one still rooted in miasma theory and traditional beliefs. The very air seemed to hold secrets, dangers unseen, and any disruption to the body's perceived protective barriers remained a source of profound anxiety. The quiet, desperate prayers in homes, the solemn processionals in the streets, were accompanied by a growing, unspoken question about the effectiveness of purely spiritual defenses. And open pores, its sheer terror also prompted new, practical efforts to manage odors and visible filth. It was a slow, agonizing education in public health, forcing medieval society to confront the devastating consequences of its existing worldview. The quiet despair of the plague years left an indelible mark, subtly paving the way for future shifts in understanding the delicate relationship between the body, its environment, and the unseen forces of disease. The lingering scent of medicinal herbs, the quiet crackle of protective fires, became the subtle reminders of a world forever changed by an unseen enemy, and healthy mingled, and where the damp, steamy air might easily spread miasma. The very concept of a communal bathing space, once a social hub, became tainted with the fear of contagion, further solidifying the European aversion to public immersion. The silent doors of closed bathhouses, the empty basins, stood as stark reminders of the pervasive fear. Fires of aromatic woods and herbs were lit in streets and homes, creating dense, scented smoke in an attempt to purify the air. Imagine the streets filled with the acrid but supposedly protective smell of burning juniper or rosemary, mingling with the pervasive scent of fear and illness. The visual of these smoky streets, the constant presence of these protective scents, would become a new norm. This was not due to a grasp of germ theory, but perhaps a coincidental observation related to fewer rats and fleas in less squalid environments. Slowly, the idea began to take hold that removing visible filth might, in some unknown way, reduce the risk. The quiet rustle of straw as it was swept away, the faint smell of lye as clothes were boiled. These were small, desperate gestures towards control. In a world without understanding of contagion, its spread was a profound mystery, often attributed to divine wrath, astrological alignments, or the infamous bad air. The air itself seemed to vibrate with a silent, unseen threat. While still far from modern sanitation, towns started to enforce stricter rules about waste disposal, trying to keep streets clearer of refuse. Orders were given to remove animal carcasses and to clean out sewers, not because they understood bacteria, but because these decaying materials created the bad air they believed was responsible for the plague. The slow, arduous work of clearing refuse, the heavy, unpleasant smells, were desperate measures in a time of profound crisis. Before the Black Death, as we have explored, the dominant medical theory was humoralism, and the fear of water stemmed from the belief that open pores allowed miasma and vital heat to escape. But when the plague arrived, killing millions, the sheer scale of the devastation forced people to search for new explanations and new ways to protect themselves. The old remedies and preventative measures seemed utterly useless in the face of such overwhelming mortality. The quiet terror of the plague, the constant low hum of anxiety, would permeate every aspect of daily life. One of the initial responses to the plague was to avoid anything that was thought to open the pores. This actually reinforced the existing aversion to bathing. Physicians and common folk alike believed that if pores were open, the plague-carrying miasma could more easily enter the body. Therefore, advice often included avoiding baths and even refraining from washing clothes frequently, as both were thought to expose the body to risk. The smell of fear, a subtle, almost palpable presence, would mingle with the general odors of the affected towns. The very act of washing, which we now associate with health, was then linked to profound danger. However, as the plague persisted, some practical observations born out of sheer desperation began to emerge. One significant shift, though still based on miasma theory, was the increased use of aromatics in fumigation. Public officials, grappling with the unprecedented crisis, also began to take rudimentary public health measures. The closing of public bathhouses, which had already been in decline, was often accelerated during plague outbreaks. The Black Death also subtly shifted religious attitudes. While some saw it as God's punishment, others began to question why piety alone seemed insufficient protection. In its aftermath, the Black Death left a profound psychological scar on Europe. So while the Black Death initially reinforced existing fears about bathing, let us now, with gentle curiosity, explore a profound paradox within medieval European life concerning water and cleanliness. The stark contrast between the general aversion to daily physical bathing and the deep, pervasive significance of ritual washing within religious practice. This duality reveals a complex cultural understanding where water was feared in one context, yet revered as a powerful purifier in another, illustrating a nuanced distinction between the mundane and the sacred. And make the sign of the cross upon entering and leaving. The priest would wash his hands with water, sometimes with a few drops of wine, symbolizing his purification before handling the sacred elements of the Eucharist. This was not a hygienic act in the modern sense. It was a ritual purification, a visual reminder of the priest's sacred role and the purity required for the divine service. The quiet trickle of water over the priest's hands, the solemnity of the gesture, reinforced the profound sacredness of the moment. This was a gesture of purification, a symbolic warding off of evil and blessing oneself before entering the sacred space. While elaborate Roman baths fell into ruin, churches continued to be built and baptismal fonts. Holy water stoups and sacristy basins remained essential features, often beautifully crafted. The soul, however, was capable of redemption and purification through divine grace. They firmly believed in the power of ritual to bring about spiritual change and protection. The efficacy of holy water, for instance, was taken as a given, a quiet certainty in a world full of uncertainties. The very act of sprinkling, of crossing oneself, was seen as an active step in warding off unseen dangers. This distinction reinforced the idea that spiritual cleansing was paramount, and physical cleanliness, while not forbidden, was of secondary importance, and even potentially distracting from higher spiritual pursuits. They represent a curious cultural duality where the very element that was widely feared for every day. Personal hygiene was simultaneously revered as a potent instrument of divine grace and spiritual purification.
Wow.
This paradox offers a subtle but profound insight into the medieval mind, revealing a world where the sacred and the profane held distinct, yet often intertwined relationships with the essential element of water. The quiet echoes of these rituals, the faint scent of incense and holy water, remain a testament to a complex understanding of purity. The emphasis was on the inner life, the spiritual journey, rather than the fleeting condition of the outer shell. Their persistent presence underscores the enduring importance of water in a sacred context. Even as its secular use for bathing dwindled, the worn edges of ancient fonts, smoothed by countless hands, whisper tales of centuries of ritual practice. This act, often performed by abbots washing the feet of their monks, or by lords washing the feet of the poor, was a profound symbol of humility, service, and spiritual cleansing.
Why?
This apparent contradiction? The key lies in the distinction between sacred space and profane space, and between spiritual and physical purity. In the context of religious ritual, water was transformed by divine blessing and human intention. It became an instrument of grace, capable of washing away sin or bestowing blessings. Its power lay not in its chemical properties, but in its symbolic and theological significance. The purity it conveyed was primarily spiritual, not physical in the germ theory sense. While the physical feet might indeed be dirty, the focus was entirely on the symbolic act of humility and purification rather than simply on physical cleanliness. The warm water, the gentle touch, the quiet reverence made this a powerful and moving ritual. Homes often kept small fonts of holy water too, used for blessing people, objects, or even crops. The quiet murmur of prayers accompanying these acts, the gentle touch of the cool water, imbued these moments with a sense of spiritual protection and grace. Here it was seen as a potential vector for illness, a force that could dangerously open the body's pores and allow disease to enter or vital heat to escape. The very same substance therefore held diametrically opposed meanings depending on the context and intention. The quiet apprehension surrounding secular water was entirely absent when water was consecrated and used for sacred purposes. The faint scent of salt, often added to holy water, would subtly mix with the scent of old stone and lingering incense in the church. Imagine the quiet solemnity of a medieval church, the air hushed, save for the priests' murmured Latin. Here, water was not merely a physical substance, it was imbued with spiritual power, a conduit for divine grace. The most prominent example is baptism, the sacrament of initiation into the Christian faith. Whether through full immersion or the more widespread pouring or sprinkling of water, baptism symbolized the washing away of original sin, a spiritual rebirth. The water in the baptismal font was consecrated, made holy, transforming it from ordinary liquid into a sacred medium. The sensation of the cool water, gently touched to the skin, carried immense spiritual weight, a profound cleansing of the soul rather than the body. Another pervasive ritual was the use of holy water. Every church had a stoup, a basin of blessed water near the entrance, where congregants would dip their fingers. The washing of hands by the priest during the Mass, particularly during the offertory, was another significant ritual. Even during Holy Week, particularly on Maundy Thursday, the ritual of foot washing was observed, commemorating Christ's washing of his disciples' feet. These ritual uses of water stand in stark contrast to the general avoidance of bathing for personal hygiene. Conversely, in the domestic or public sphere, water remained ordinary, subject to the fears derived from humoral theory and miasma. Archaeological evidence, though less direct for ritual washing, supports this distinction. Furthermore, medieval theological thought often emphasized the fallen nature of the body, which was seen as inherently prone to sin and corruption. The paradox also highlights the medieval understanding of efficacy. While they saw little direct link between physical bathing and preventing the major diseases of the time. So, the quiet flow of water in a baptismal font, the gentle sprinkle from a holy water stoup, the solemn washing of a priest's hands. These were not merely acts of cleaning, but profound gestures saturated with theological meaning. Let us now gently broaden our perspective once more, stepping away from the distinct practices of medieval Europe and casting our gaze towards the vibrant and enduring tradition of public baths in the East and South. specifically in the Byzantine Empire and the Islamic world. Here, centuries after their decline in Western Europe, public baths continued to operate, albeit often in a form slightly less grand than their classical Roman predecessors. These Byzantine baths, while perhaps simpler in their architecture, retained the core function of communal cleansing and social interaction. As we have briefly touched upon the growth of Islam with its strong emphasis on ritual purity for prayer, ensured that access to water and bathing facilities became a religious imperative. It was a place of sensory comfort where one could escape the heat of the day or the chill of the night. The rituals of scrubbing with the keys, applying natural soaps, and receiving massages were not seen as luxuries, but as integral parts of a healthy and pious life. These structures, with their intricate heating systems, similar in principle to the Roman hypocaust here, during periods of Muslim rule, sophisticated bathhouses flourished, influencing some local Christian populations. However, these influences were often localized and did not widely displace the prevailing European attitudes towards bathing, which remained largely dominated by fears related to disease and humoral theory. The remnants of these baths in Spain and Sicily stand as a quiet testament to a cultural exchange that, while limited, did occur, but often adapted multiple chambers and sophisticated drainage. Stand as silent witnesses to a civilization that prioritized public hygiene and valued the communal bath, while Europe retreated from communal bathing. These other civilizations not only maintained but elevated the practice. Driven by religious tenets, social needs, and a different medical understanding, this hygiene divide meant that medieval Europeans lived in a world of limited washing and pervasive odors, while their counterparts to the east and south often experienced a more profound and routine sense of physical cleanliness and communal well-being through their vibrant and enduring bath traditions. The warm, steamy air of the hammam, so different from the cold, fearful perception of water in medieval Europe, stands as a quiet symbol of this profound divergence in daily life. The very layout of these ruins, the remnants of water channels and heating flues, whisper tales of constant activity and a commitment to cleanliness. The feeling of smooth, warm marble beneath the body, the invigorating friction of the keys, these were the tactile experiences of deep cleansing. From Spain to Persia and across North Africa, hammams became ubiquitous features of every town and city. For women especially, they provided a vital social outlet, space where they could gather, converse, and find respite from the confines of their homes. This communal aspect, so central to the Roman bath, was preserved and adapted within the Islamic cultural context. The quiet chatter, the laughter, the shared sense of relaxation, all contributed to the hammam's role as a social hub. They were meticulously built and maintained, supplied by sophisticated water systems, and deeply integrated into the fabric of daily life. But with different interpretations, water and warmth were often seen as beneficial for health. The concept of balancing humors through perspiration and cleansing was widely accepted. This contrasted sharply with the European fear of opening pores and losing vital heat to cold water. The warmth of the hammam, its ability to induce a gentle sweat, was seen as a restorative process, not a dangerous exposure. The very air within a hammam, thick with steam and the scent of human warmth and gentle soaps, would be a place of quiet sensory immersion. They were places where citizens could come to wash, relax, and socialize. maintaining a continuity with ancient practices that had largely vanished in the West. The sounds of conversation, the splashing of water, the general hum of human activity would fill these spaces, much as they had in Roman times. This exploration offers a profound counterpoint, illuminating a parallel history where the communal bath not only survived the fall of Rome, the Eastern Roman Empire did not experience the same level of urban collapse or economic fragmentation as the West. Centralized authority and an existing infrastructure allowed for the maintenance of water supplies and public buildings. Furthermore, the Eastern Orthodox Church, while emphasizing spiritual purity, did not develop the same level of ascetic aversion to physical cleanliness as some Western monastic ideals. In fact, ritual washing remained important, and the practical benefits of hygiene were generally acknowledged. The quiet resilience of these baths, surviving through centuries of turmoil, is a testament to their inherent value in Byzantine society. But thrived, becoming a cornerstone of daily life and showcasing a fundamentally different relationship with water and cleanliness. Imagine the bustling streets of Constantinople, capital of the Byzantine Empire, a direct continuation of Roman traditions. The continuity in Byzantium stemmed from several factors. However, the most striking contrast comes from the Islamic world, where the hammam became an institution of paramount importance. Consider the atmosphere of a busy hammam, the gentle warmth permeating the marble surfaces, the soft sound of water trickling from taps, the quiet murmur of voices. Beyond religious observance, hammams served crucial social functions. They were places for community gathering, for gossip, for business, and for relaxation. The philosophical approach to the body was also distinct. In Islamic medical thought, influenced by ancient Greek and Persian traditions, which themselves built on humoral theory, archaeological evidence of these hammams can be found throughout what was once the Islamic world. From the elaborate ruins in Granada, Spain, to the functioning historic baths in Damascus, Syria, and Fez, Morocco, the knowledge and practices of hygiene from the East did, on occasion, make their way into Europe, particularly through regions like Sicily and Islamic Spain. The contrast presented by the public baths of the East and South offers a quiet reflection on alternative paths history could have taken regarding hygiene. As our quiet journey through the medieval world nears its gentle conclusion, let us linger for a moment on the small, often overlooked acts of personal soothing and comfort that permeated daily life, particularly when extensive bathing was rare. These were not grand rituals of cleanliness, but subtle gestures aimed at alleviating discomfort, refreshing the senses, and providing fleeting moments of respite in an often physically demanding and unwashed existence. For both men and women, regardless of social status, hair was a constant presence, often long and susceptible to tangles and the accumulation of dust and debris. After a long day of labor, or upon rising, a person might take a piece of rough linen or wool, perhaps slightly damp, and vigorously rub down their skin. This provided a physical exfoliation, removing loose dirt and dead skin and stimulating circulation. To shed a heavy sweat-soaked garment and don a clean one, even if the body underneath remained unwashed, provided a psychological and physical uplift. The fresh feel of the fabric against the skin, the subtle reduction in clinging odors, would be a welcome respite. The quiet rustle of fresh linen, the feeling of its lightness against the body, would be a small luxury. While not a true wash, it offered a sense of refreshment and cleanliness, albeit superficial. They highlight a quiet ingenuity in finding comfort and maintaining a degree of well-being within constraints that would seem challenging to us today. The preference for dry cleansing, for aromatic masks, and for simple physical comforts reveals a society that, while wary of water for bathing, was far from indifferent to the need for personal alleviation and occasional moments of soothing. The quiet acts of brushing, rubbing, and scenting were their methods of engaging with their bodies, offering small, fleeting moments of refreshment in a world where deep, water-based cleansing was a rare and often feared event. The lasting scent of wood smoke on clothes, the subtle aroma of dried herbs, these would be the quiet, comforting odors that lingered in the medieval home. Sitting close to the hearth, or wrapping oneself in warm woolen blankets, provided comfort and a sense of healing. The lack of pervasive artificial scents meant that natural aromas of the earth, of animals, of cooking, and of the human body were far more prominent and accepted. After a long day of physical labor, the quiet unconsciousness of sleep, perhaps on a straw mattress near the warmth of the hearth, offered a fundamental reset for the body and mind. It was a period of stillness, a quiet internal cleansing, allowing the body to recover and prepare for the demands of the next day. The rhythmic breathing of others nearby, the subtle creak of timbers, would form a gentle auditory lullaby. There was a different kind of sensory baseline, a quiet familiarity with a broader spectrum of natural odors. This acceptance meant that the small acts of applying a fragrant herb or brushing out tangled hair became more significant, more noticeable moments of care. The subtle complexity of the air, a blend of all these natural presences, was simply the air of their world. While not directly related to bathing, this reliance on warmth to soothe the body reinforced the idea that cold was to be avoided. The gentle crackle of the fire, the enveloping warmth of the wool, would create a profound sense of security and relief, a counterpoint to the chill of the unheated spaces. The friction against the skin, the warmth generated by the rubbing, would create an immediate, invigorating sensation. It's a quick removal of the day's surface grime. The faint smell of friction and human warmth would linger in the air. While full hair washing was infrequent, daily combing was a common practice. Poultices made from soothing herbs like chamomile or calendula might be applied, or skin might be rubbed with oils infused with lavender or mint. These offered relief and a pleasant, albeit temporary, scent. The soft, cool application of a herbal poultice or the smooth glide of an aromatic oil would provide a quiet moment of relief, a subtle balm for irritated skin. The specific scent of the herbs would mingle with the body's own natural odors, creating a localized fragrant presence. A wooden or bone comb, often smooth and worn from repeated use, would be drawn through the hair, working out knots, distributing natural oils, and removing loose dirt. This was not merely about appearance. It provided a soothing sensation to the scalp, a small moment of personal care. Imagine the gentle scrape of the comb, the subtle pull on the strands, releasing a faint, earthy scent of accumulated hair and scalp oils. The rhythmic motion of combing would offer a quiet, almost meditative comfort. Imagine the quiet satisfaction found in these small, tactile moments. Consider the simple act of combing one's hair. The use of dry cloths and rubs was also a pervasive form of cleansing. For alleviating persistent itching or skin irritations, which would have been common given the lack of hygiene, Various herbal remedies were employed. Even the simple act of changing clothes, particularly for those who had multiple garments, offered a profound sense of comfort and a rudimentary form of hygiene. For those in pain or suffering from minor ailments, warmth was often sought. The medieval person's sensory world was also shaped by the absence of many stimuli we take for granted. Consider the role of sleep itself as a form of natural refreshment. These were not moments of luxury, but necessary adaptations to the realities of medieval life. As we quietly draw closer to the nuances of medieval medical thought, let us now gently turn our attention to the emergence of medical manuals and treatises during this period, and how they both reflected and reinforced the prevailing attitudes towards hygiene, often offering limited and cautious advice regarding bathing. These texts, written by learned physicians of the time, provide a fascinating window into their understanding of the human body. Every recommendation, every treatment was filtered through the lens of balancing the four humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness was an imbalance, and health was the restoration of equilibrium. Hot baths might be recommended for individuals deemed cold or phlegmatic.
Ouch.
To introduce warmth and help balance their humors, medical texts would advise against bathing on a full stomach or immediately after strenuous exercise, or during times of epidemic. Particularly strong reinforcement of the fear of contagion, though not understood in terms of germs. Bathing at night when the air was coldest was generally discouraged for fear of chills. Such detailed instructions highlight that bathing was not a casual act, but a medical intervention requiring careful consideration in specific circumstances. They were expensive to produce and access, primarily serving educated physicians and a very small literate elite. The vast majority of the population relied on traditional folk remedies, inherited wisdom, and the practical necessities of their daily lives, which largely reinforced the same cautious approach to water. The quiet turning of the manuscript pages, the careful study of the handwritten text, would be a privilege of the very few. The slow, deliberate unrolling of these rules, the meticulous detail, spoke to the perceived gravity of the act. While not for bathing, these highly scented, often alcoholic preparations were sometimes dabbed on the skin to cleanse and invigorate, without the use of water. This again points to the preference for dry or spirit-based cleansing over water immersion. Albeit the sharp alcoholic tang, followed by the comforting scent of herbs, offered a different kind of sensory experience, a superficial purification. However, cold baths were generally warned against, as they were thought to chill the body and open pores, too drastically inviting disease. Their advice on bathing was restrictive, cautious, and primarily therapeutic, reflecting a worldview where water, particularly cold water, was seen as a potential threat to the body's delicate internal balance. These texts, painstakingly copied and studied, reinforced the idea that cleanliness was a complex and often risky endeavor, far removed from the refreshing daily ritual we know today, subtly guiding the limited and cautious practices of personal care throughout the era. The very words on the page, carefully chosen and steeped in centuries of medical thought, whispered warnings about the dangers of the bath. Washing the hands and face was accepted and even encouraged, particularly before eating or after working with unpleasant substances. This was seen as a practical measure that did not carry the same risks as full-body bathing. Rubbing the body with oils or using scented cloths was also mentioned as a way to refresh. the skin without the dangers of water immersion. These smaller, more frequent acts were seen as safe alternatives to the perilous full bath. The water used would often be infused with herbs, not for fragrance, but for their perceived medicinal properties, adding another layer of therapeutic intention to the rare bath. Washing the hair or head with water was frequently cautioned against, as it was believed that colds, fevers, and even madness could result from chilling the brain through open pores in the scalp. Hence, the reliance on dry powders and careful brushing that we explored earlier for the elite was a practice rooted in these pervasive medical beliefs. The subtle shiver of fear, the quiet worry about the delicate balance of the head's humors, underpinned these specific warnings. The gentle steam rising from the herbal infusion, the subtle medicinal scent, which would define these infrequent therapeutic washes. This fundamental understanding permeated all advice on diet, exercise, environment, and personal care. The quiet contemplation of these theories, the careful application of their principles, guided medical practice and disease, revealing a continuity of humoral theory and a subtle, yet persistent apprehension about the dangers of water. Imagine a quiet scriptorium, illuminated by the soft glow of candles, where a scholar diligently copies or compiles a medical text. These manuscripts, often richly illustrated, were repositories of accumulated medical knowledge, passed down through generations from ancient Greek, Roman, and increasingly Arabic sources. Physicians, often clerics or university-trained individuals, would consult these texts to diagnose ailments, prescribe remedies, and offer advice on maintaining health. The very act of reading these texts, slowly and deliberately, would be a quiet meditation on the complexities of the human condition. Central to almost all medieval medical advice was the humoral theory, which we have previously explored. When it came to bathing, these medical manuals generally reflected the societal apprehension. They did not advocate for frequent or full-body immersion as a routine hygienic practice for the general population. Instead, any advice on bathing was typically framed within a therapeutic or highly cautious context. The emphasis was on avoiding actions that might open the pores or cause the loss of vital heat, thereby inviting illness. The very act of writing about bathing was often accompanied by caveats and warnings, a subtle whisper of the dangers perceived. For instance, if bathing was advised, it was often for specific ailments, to draw out impurities, or to relax the body, but always with strict caveats. The timing of baths was also crucial. The advice often focused on superficial cleansing rather than full immersion. The manuals also reflected a particular concern for the head. It is important to note that while these medical manuals provided guidance, their reach was limited. The gradual introduction of distilled spirits and their use in medicinal cordials or waters also subtly influenced perceptions. In conclusion, the medieval medical manuals serve as a quiet testament to the enduring dominance of humoral theory and the pervasive fear of water in European society. Let us now gently draw our attention to another subtle but significant factor contributing to the rarity of medieval bathing: the scarcity and rudimentary nature of soap. This exploration reveals not only the practical difficulties of cleanliness, but also highlights the economic and technological constraints that quietly shaped daily life and personal hygiene during this era. Imagine a world where the very concept of a frothy, mass-produced bar of soap was was centuries away, where cleansing agents were harsh, rare, and often difficult to come by. Ashes would be collected from the hearth and water poured over them, slowly leaching out the lye. This caustic liquid would then be carefully mixed with rendered animal fat and boiled for hours, a slow, simmering alchemy. Or later from Italian cities like Venice and Genoa, which had trade links with the East. The evidence suggests that production was often small-scale and local, focused more on textile processing or basic household cleaning than on personal care. The very scarcity of such finds speaks volumes about the limited role of soap in medieval daily life. It was a laborious task, requiring large amounts of water and physical effort. And the soap itself was difficult to rinse out, often leaving residues that could irritate the skin. It was not a widespread, consumer-friendly product, but a harsh, often homemade substance primarily used for heavy-duty cleaning. This technological and economic constraint, combined with the lack of understanding about germ theory, ensured that soap remained a marginal player in personal cleanliness. The quiet absence of the familiar frothy lather, the lack of a gentle cleansing agent, was a fundamental reality of medieval life, contributing to the enduring presence of unwashed bodies and the reliance on other, less effective methods of refreshing the self. The subtle, persistent scent of animal fat and lye, the quiet evidence of rudimentary processing, speak of a world where soap was a tool of necessity, not a comfort. Thus, the cycle of infrequent washing extended to garments as well as bodies, further contributing to the pervasive odors of the era. The heavy, damp feel of wet, lye-soaked linen, the arduous process of wringing it out, all contributed to the infrequency of laundry. The earth itself holds faint whispers of these rudimentary efforts at cleansing. These imported soaps were milder, more effective, and sometimes scented with fragrant oils. However, they were expensive luxuries, accessible only to the wealthy elite. Imagine the delicate, clean scent of an imported olive oil soap, a rare treat that would contrast sharply with the prevailing odors of the time. The smooth, luxurious feel of such a soap would be a palpable difference for those fortunate enough to experience it. The resulting mixture, once cooled, would be a thick, greenish-brown mass, often inconsistent in quality. So, the purpose of soap, when used, was primarily to remove visible dirt and grease and to reduce strong odors. Its role in preventing disease, which we now understand so well, was completely unknown. Using harsh, irritating lye soap on delicate skin could cause discomfort, dryness, and even skin irritation, further disincentivizing the act of bathing. Why endure an unpleasant experience if the perceived benefits were minimal and the potential discomfort significant? The burning sensation of strong lye soap, the feeling of dryness, would be deterrents to regular use on the body. Therefore, the motivation for using soap for personal hygiene was diminished by this lack of scientific understanding. The subtle perception was that if dirt was not truly harmful, then why go to the trouble and expense of rigorous removal? The feel of this coarse, gritty substance, the lingering scent of animal fat and lye, would be far from the luxurious experience of modern bathing. In the early Middle Ages, the knowledge of soap making, particularly the more refined methods inherited from Roman times, largely faded in Western Europe. For many, a simple coarse cloth, sand, or rough natural fibers, combined with plain water, would be the primary means of scrubbing away visible dirt. The friction, rather than the chemical action of soap, was their main tool. The sensation of rough materials against the skin, designed to scrape rather than chemically cleanse, would be a familiar daily experience. While simple lye-based soaps existed, their production was often localized and rudimentary. The primary ingredients were animal fats and lye, obtained by leaching wood ashes. The process was imprecise, and the resulting soap was often harsh, alkaline, and more suitable for laundry or industrial purposes than for delicate skin. The very smell of this basic soap, a strong, caustic aroma, would be distinct from the gentle fragrances we associate with modern soaps. Imagine a medieval household attempting to make soap. It would be a messy, labor-intensive process. Due to the labor and raw materials involved, and the relatively low demand for personal bathing soap, it was not a widely available commodity for the common person. For those who could afford it, better quality soaps were sometimes imported, particularly from the more advanced centers of the Islamic world. The very concept of cleanliness was not yet linked to the removal of germs. As microbiology was centuries away, archaeological digs occasionally uncover remnants of medieval soap-making tools or fragments of basic soap, offering quiet glimpses into these forgotten industries. The absence of readily available gentle soap also reinforced the reluctance to bathe frequently. Furthermore, the process of washing clothes with these harsh soaps also contributed to their infrequent laundering. In essence, the scarcity and rudimentary composition of medieval soap played a quiet, yet significant role in shaping hygiene practices. As our quiet journey through the medieval understanding of bathing reaches its gentle twilight, let us turn our attention to the very late medieval period and the subtle, nascent seeds of change that began to emerge, particularly within elite circles and larger urban centers. While the pervasive fear of water and the humoral theory remained deeply entrenched, practical necessities and glimpses of alternative practices slowly started to nudge attitudes, laying quiet groundwork for the profound shifts that would come centuries later. A lord or lady might occasionally request a bath, but it would still be an event, requiring servants to laboriously heat and carry water. However, the experience itself might become slightly more refined. Long campaigns or arduous pilgrimages, which forced people to live in close quarters for extended periods and endure physical hardships, often necessitated some form of washing, however crude. Soldiers might occasionally find opportunities for a quick wash in a river, or pilgrims might cleanse themselves at sacred springs. While not luxurious, these practical needs often superseded the deep-seated fears, highlighting that necessity could, at times, override ingrained beliefs. While the core beliefs remained, a greater emphasis was placed on moderation in all things, including bathing. The widespread routine practice of full-body bathing would not become common for centuries, largely awaiting the scientific revolution's understanding of germ theory and the advent of modern sanitation infrastructure. They represent a quiet, evolving consciousness, a slow chipping away at deeply ingrained beliefs. The preference for dry rubs, the strategic use of aromatics, the limited therapeutic baths, and the faint glimmer of external influences all contributed to a gradual, almost imperceptible movement towards a different relationship with the body and its cleanliness. The lingering scent of medicinal herbs and fine perfumes, the subtle comfort of clean linen, became the quiet signs of this slow transformation. foreshadowing a future where water would eventually lose its fearful reputation and become a symbol of health and purification. The fear of water, rooted in humoral theory and a lack of understanding about disease transmission, would continue to dominate the medieval mind for a long time to come. This nuanced approach, rather than outright rejection, suggested a growing recognition that certain forms of washing, under controlled circumstances, might not be entirely detrimental. The careful, measured advice of a physician, the quiet contemplation of a patient's humors, might lead to a cautious recommendation for a therapeutic wash. The cold, bracing feel of river water, the brief, invigorating splash, would be a stark but welcome moment of physical relief. Fragrant waters, herbal infusions, and even early rudimentary bath bombs, made of scented powders, might be added to the water to make the experience more pleasant. As more goods flowed from the Islamic world in Byzantium, so too did ideas and practices. While the widespread adoption of hammam culture did not occur in Europe, exposure to Eastern luxury goods, including finer soaps and perfumes, subtly influenced the desires of the elite. The increasing availability of more pleasant and effective soaps, even if still expensive, offered a glimpse of a different kind of cleanliness, one less associated with harshness and discomfort. The delicate scent of imported olive oil soap, a subtle whisper of distant lands, would slowly begin to influence European tastes. The emphasis remained on aromatic masking and superficial refreshment, rather than deep cleansing. Town councils might issue ordinances about throwing refuse into the streets, or about maintaining cleaner market areas. These were not driven by a germ theory understanding, but by a pragmatic desire to make urban life more tolerable, and, they hoped, healthier. The slow, arduous process of clearing waste, the subtle improvements in urban odors, were early, quiet steps towards a more managed public environment. The gentle warmth of the water, the delicate scent of herbs, offered a brief, quiet escape from the day's accumulated grime. Imagine the bustling, growing cities of the 14th and 15th centuries, like London, Paris, or Florence. Baths at natural hot springs, known for their mineral properties, are sometimes sought out for their perceived healing benefits for specific ailments like skin conditions or joint pain. These were not seen as hygiene baths, but as medicinal treatments, carefully prescribed by physicians and undertaken with specific intentions. The subtle smell of sulfur or other minerals from the spring water would permeate the air, a natural aroma associated with healing. As populations grew, so too did the problems of waste, disease, and urban density. While the Black Death had instilled a deeper fear, it also, paradoxically, sparked some initial rudimentary efforts at improving public health, driven by sheer necessity. These were not systematic public health reforms as we know them today, but rather pragmatic responses to immediate, overwhelming problems. The constant murmur of city life, the increasing density of human presence, gradually began to demand new considerations for collective well-being. Within noble households, while the full immersive bath remained rare, there was a quiet, almost imperceptible increase in the use of portable tubs and more frequent partial washes. The idea of therapeutic baths continued to be recognized in medical texts and practiced among the wealthy. Perhaps one of the most significant, though often overlooked, areas of change was in the military and pilgrimage contexts. The burgeoning trade routes with the East also played a quiet role. By the late medieval period, some urban regulations began to address cleanliness, albeit primarily to control visible filth and prevent the spread of odors. The slow, almost imperceptible shift also came from the increasing professionalism of physicians and the accumulation of empirical observations, even if still interpreted through a humoral lens. However, it is crucial to emphasize that these were merely the seeds of change, faint whispers of what was to come. Yet, these subtle shifts in the late medieval period are important to acknowledge